Hello, I'm Steve Freeman and I'm the partner that heads up MHA's automotive sector practice. And in that role, I'm really looking forward to the outputs from the COP26 transport day today. I think it's fair to say, from what I've seen within the automotive sector, that carbon emissions and the net zero agenda has been a very, very key priority for the sector over recent years already, which is good to hear. There's reasons why. I think the EU CO2 emissions fines regime has clearly driven OEMs in terms of the need to eliminate the potential risk of fines. And OEMs have therefore been very proactively replacing the internal combustion engines that they're producing with electric vehicles in the short term, and even looking at hydrogen vehicles in the more mid-term. So I think it's fair to say the sector has a burning platform in terms of the green agenda, but the OEMs have very much embraced this and have poured incredible investment into EV models and lineups as we're seeing recently. In terms of how this is achieved and mandated across countries, countries are setting their own ICE, internal combustion engine, sale bans, targets, for example, the UK with the 2030 ban. And I think it's fair to say those countries that have set more accelerated targets and timelines for bans are already seeing very significant increased retail sales of the electric vehicles, Norway being a classic point in case. But even the UK now, where 2021 BEV volumes exceed volumes for the previous 10 years. So that's really good to hear. What I'm looking for from COP26, I think, is for new ICE ban timetables to be agreed across all countries and accelerated where possible. So I'm joined by a panel of experts today in terms of the achievement of these COP26 targets and the key challenges that are faced by government and industry and impact on consumer. The first expert to join me is Nigel Morris. Nigel, I think it's probably fair to say that one of the biggest challenges we're seeing with our discussions with OEMs and retailers is around infrastructure and infrastructure challenges for electrification. Could you please provide your thoughts in terms of those key challenges?
Yes, thanks, Steve. So in my role of supporting on EVs and EV readiness, I think some of the key infrastructure challenges that we're seeing, and really what I'm hoping that the UK representatives discuss and share with their colleagues from around the globe to see what other initiatives have been undertaken in other jurisdictions to address these. Firstly, the charging network. We need really in this country to get on top of our charging network, to deal with interconnectivity, to deal with reliability, to give those people moving towards electric vehicles and plug-in charging vehicles the confidence. I think range anxiety is better now and has been addressed quite well by the OEMs. But I think now the actual network, the living on a day-to-day basis, the government needs to sort of, support what's going on in the network and bring all of that together. And the second point is actually supporting the speed of change. We've seen some early adopters and some very well-educated individuals who've gone into electric vehicles. But I think now the supporting the corporate market, the corporate lease market, the next step change is going to be the corporates taking on those vehicles as part of their own fleet, as part of company car fleets, part of their LCV fleet, and actually just making sure that the right incentives are there and the support is packaged the right way to help them, because there are potentially some holes in that that some of our colleagues will deal with later on. I think some additional tax and fiscal stimulus would be helpful. I mean, we've got very good support at the moment, but some of that is starting to wane. We've had very low benefit of time tax on electric vehicles, company cars. That's going to remain for quite some time, to 24, 25, which is helpful. But actually, at the moment that some of the car grants and some of the home charger grants, etc., are sort of being diminished and replaced by incentives to support what goes on in terms of on-street charging or motorway charging or the key road infrastructures, which is all very positive. But actually, some of the things we've seen in some other countries to support people moving towards electric vehicles have been the stimulus or the charging around the ICE vehicles, the internal combustion engine vehicles, as we've seen in some of the Nordic countries. actually taking a diesel or petrol car that might have a £22,000 starting price, then adding on some CO2 tax, some NOx tax, some weight tax, and some VAT. That vehicle then ends up being sort of a sticker price of €34,000, whereas actually the EV vehicle starts at €33,000 but finishes at €33,000, and there still cheaper to the consumer. And so, some stimulus to make sure that we get the right support and the right encouragement to get more of the EVs into the marketplace. And I think the final point, whilst there's huge demand at the moment, we're hearing from our networks, from our manufacturers and from our dealers, what we're seeing is quite a number of supply issues. Some of that obviously is linked to semiconductors, which we know about, a global issue affecting all sorts of different sectors. But actually what we're not seeing is actually any support from the government in that. If the semiconductors aren't getting to the motor manufacturers because they're lowering the pecking chain because of activity or cost, is there some stimulus and support the government can put in there? And so that maybe the marketplace can pay an attractive rate for the semiconductors and bump themselves up the line and get the supply coming, because otherwise we have a bit of a potential of a burning platform where consumer demand might start to wane because supply is so far pushed back into the future. So I think there's a few things there that could be done. It would be good to see what announcements there are, and good to see what learning our UK representatives get from their global colleagues.
That's excellent. Thank you, Nigel. So a real mix of regulatory impacts, but also fiscal incentives and policy driving some of this as well, which leads on then to my next guest, who's Anthony McFarlane, Specialist Motor Tax Director in my team. Anthony, any other thoughts in terms of some of the recent fiscal incentives to encourage green investment?
Yeah, so Steve, I think tax policy needs to change to reach net zero. A carrot and stick approach is no doubt needed. In terms of direct tax incentives, the obvious action is to utilise capital allowances to encourage the right type of capital investment. The super deduction was launched in April 2021, was seen as a good way to grow the economy out of the pandemic. However, it mainly fed into the build back element of the government's build back better mantra. It was really an opportunity missed to incentivise the use of cleaner technologies, particularly as some of the capital allowance legislation, which the relief is built upon, is arguably out of date when it comes to newer and greener technology. If we take EV chargers as an example, dealers and their advisors are left navigating the strict rules to ensure relief for EV chargers is maximised. Upfront planning and documentation is key to ensuring maximising tax relief, when really it should be clear and easy for dealers to obtain generous tax relief when investing in greener solutions for the planet. The super deduction was therefore perhaps an opportunity missed, and the government could have focused more on the better element of the Build Back Better mantra and announced the relief that is more generous but focused and tailored to green technology. Another main tax relief when thinking about enabling green solutions is R&D relief, which should enable businesses to invest time and resources into developing and researching better solutions. The relief has recently been extended, but again, perhaps it was another opportunity missed to really incentivise focus on greener solutions and maybe of little obvious interest to our dealers. Finally, other tax and fiscal incentives are more likely to be through indirect tax measures, so in the form of levies such as climate change levy, VAT and other measures mentioned by Nigel.
That's great. Thank you, Anthony. So I think there's more to be done there in terms of the government's fiscal agenda to achieve this green progress. You mentioned indirect taxes there. I'm also joined by Glyn Edwards, Automotive VAT Specialist. Glyn, I guess VAT very much links into the consumer demand, consumer journey. Could you share your thoughts on that, please, and any incentives?
Yes, so Steve, I think the consumer's somehow been missed out of a lot of this conversation. The latest survey by the RAC said that 90% of buyers, consumers, are not considering an EV as their next purchase. So there's a great big swathe of people just aren't in the game yet in terms of buyers. And I think that's a reflection somewhat of the government's approach to this. So in July of this year, the Department for Transport published their decarbonisation plan. It's a great document, 216-page document. tax gets mentioned 4 times in 216 pages. And one of those is about bicycles. So you can see there's a big gap there. And of the 3 other mentions, one of them is about making sure that the tax take doesn't decline too much as a result of decarbonisation. So it's actually a threat to increase taxes on greener forms of transport in the future. So there's sort of very mixed message going out to consumers. But we've seen from previous sort of issues that government can have a massive impact through clever taxation policies. And the example I use is cigarette smoking. So cigarette smoking, for years and years and years, there was sort of a health message. And I think that's really where we are with carbon. There's a huge message going out to everybody about the damage carbon's doing. And that will influence a lot of people, but it won't really influence the mass. And that was the experience with cigarettes. Health messages didn't stop addiction. Really what stopped addiction was taxing those behaviours you wanted to change and providing an alternative that was cheaper. So severe taxation of firstly high tar cigarettes, then cigarettes generally, and then the real game changer was vaping. And that's the sort of journey we need to think about in terms of EVs. Maybe we need to change VAT rates, for example. So we have higher VAT rates, first of all, for very high polluting vehicles, and then maybe for ICE vehicles generally. But also, where is the reduced VAT rate for EVs? As they withdraw grant support for EVs, this is an ideal opportunity. And there's other things you can do with indirect tax. So for example, I'm regularly asked the question, as a business, can I recover VAT on my EV purchase? Everybody expects the answer to be yes, and the answer is no. EVs and ICE are treated exactly the same in terms of VAT recovery by businesses. And again, that's an opportunity I think the government needs to grasp. There's lots of good work going on. We've heard some of that already, but there's lots more to do, particularly at the consumer end.
That's great. Thank you very much, Glyn. So I think there's certainly some work to be done. We see around fiscal policy to support what comes out of COP26 today for the sector. The sector has been proactive. There has been a burning platform that has driven that. But I think we, as well as government, as well as consumer, we would like to see industry really, not just our sector, but all sectors embracing this green agenda. Using fiscal incentives, but also using regulation, but more proactively. So, for example, ESG, environment, social and governance regulations, really framing those to become part of strategy and part of value accretion for industry, for businesses in our sector and other sectors. And I'm sure, I would hope from COP26 we're going to see a bit more around how net zero is measured, what needs to be disclosed by business and industry to really move them forward, what standards can be followed, and that's where we as accountants need to really lead the agenda in terms of setting standards for reporting and disclosures, but also for measuring and independent certification. So I think there's responsibility, not just in this sector, in all sectors, across government, across industry and across consumer, as well as the professional firms to advise, and we really hope to see some of that come out from COP26 today.